On a misty autumn morning in California's Sierra Nevada foothills, Tom Bradley was driving a familiar mountain road when something made him stop. At a familiar intersection near the edge of the woods, a large bobcat emerged, limping, wounded, clearly in distress from what looked like a vicious fight. But when their eyes met, something extraordinary happened. Tom felt a jolt of emotion. It was the same bobcat he had rescued and raised years ago, the one he had carefully released back into the wild when it was strong enough to survive on its own. How did this injured bobcat find its way back to the exact spot where its life was once saved? This is the true story of an impossible reunion, a bond that transcended species, and a decision that would shock the entire wildlife community. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The morning mist hung low over the Sierra Nevada foothills, painting the California landscape in soft grays and gentle gold. Tom Bradley drove his weathered pickup truck down the familiar mountain road, windows down to catch the crisp October air. At 68, he had grown to appreciate these quiet moments. The solitude of the early morning, the way the light filtered through the towering pines, the promise of another day at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center where he'd volunteered for the past 15 years. As he approached the intersection where Forest Road 42 met Highway 108, Tom slowed his vehicle. This particular spot had always held special meaning for him. It was here, 7 years ago, that his life had been forever changed by a chance encounter with a tiny, orphaned bobcat cub. He still remembered that day vividly. The way the little creature had stumbled onto the asphalt, no bigger than a house cat, eyes barely open, crying pitifully for a mother who would never come. Tom had been on his way home from a supply run when he spotted the bundle of spotted fur in the middle of the road. Without hesitation, he'd stopped, carefully wrapped the weakened cub in his old hunting jacket, and driven straight to the Northern California Wildlife Rehabilitation Center where he volunteered. That cub, whom they'd named Spirit, had become his greatest success story. For 6 months, Tom had helped care for the young bobcat, watching it grow from a helpless infant to a strong, proud predator ready to reclaim its place in the wild. The release had been both heartbreaking and triumphant. Tom had carried Spirit deep into the protected wilderness area, opened the transport crate, and watched as the young bobcat had looked back at him once, just once, before disappearing into the dense undergrowth. That had been over 6 years ago, and Tom had often wondered what became of the magnificent creature he'd helped raise. This morning, as Tom's truck idled at the intersection, something caught his peripheral vision. A movement in the brush, slow and deliberate. He turned to look, expecting perhaps a deer or even a black bear, creatures that were common in these parts. Instead, what emerged from the thick manzanita and oak scrub made his heart skip a beat. A large bobcat limped onto the shoulder of the road, its tawny coat matted and dirty, one rear leg clearly injured. The animal moved with obvious pain, dragging the damaged limb as it struggled forward. But what stopped Tom's breath entirely was the way the bobcat looked directly at his truck, not with the wariness typical of wild predators encountering humans, but with something that looked heartbreakingly like recognition. Tom's hands trembled as he slowly rolled down his window. The bobcat continued its painful approach, each step deliberate and determined. As it drew nearer, Tom could see the distinctive rosette patterns in its fur, now dulled with dust and dried blood. A long gash ran across its shoulder, and bite marks were visible on its haunches. This was clearly an animal that had recently been in a serious fight, likely with another large predator. "Easy there, big fella," Tom whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The bobcat paused just a few feet from the truck, swaying slightly on its three good legs. Its golden eyes, eyes that Tom suddenly realized he remembered, fixed on his face with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. Then, the impossible happened. The bobcat took another painful step forward, placing its front paws gently against the passenger door of the truck. Its head drooped with exhaustion, but those familiar eyes never left Tom's face. There was no mistaking it now. This was Spirit, the cub he had helped raise and release all those years ago. Spirit? Tom's voice cracked as he spoke the name aloud for the first time in years. At the sound, the bobcat's ears twitched, and it made a low, chuffing sound, a vocalization Tom remembered well from the animal's kittenhood. It was the sound Spirit had made when seeking comfort or attention. Tears began to stream down Tom's weathered cheeks. The reunion was beyond anything he could have imagined, but the circumstances were heartbreaking. Spirit was clearly in distress, wounded and exhausted. The proud predator that had once bounded effortlessly through the rehabilitation center's enclosures was now struggling just to stand. Tom slowly opened his door and stepped out of the truck, moving with deliberate calm to avoid startling the injured bobcat. But Spirit showed no fear. Instead, as Tom approached, the great cat's legs gave out, and it collapsed heavily onto the gravel shoulder. With a sound that was part mew, part groan, Spirit pressed its massive head against Tom's leg, just as it had done as a cub when seeking reassurance. Kneeling beside the wounded animal, Tom carefully examined the injuries. The gash on Spirit's shoulder was deep but appeared clean. The bite marks on its rear legs were more concerning. They looked infected, and the overall condition of the bobcat suggested it had been traveling for days, possibly weeks, in this wounded state. "What brought you back here, old friend?" Tom murmured, gently stroking the matted fur on Spirit's head. "How did you know to find me?" The questions hung in the morning air, unanswered, but somehow understood. Spirit had traveled, injured and alone, to the very spot where its life had been saved once before. The homing instinct was powerful in all wild animals, but this seemed to transcend mere instinct. This felt like a conscious choice made by an animal that remembered kindness and sought it out in its darkest hour. Without hesitation, Tom returned to his truck and retrieved a large wool blanket from behind the driver's seat. The same blanket he carried for emergencies had once wrapped a tiny bobcat cub. Now it would serve the same purpose for that cub, grown into a magnificent but wounded adult. Carefully, Tom lifted Spirit, no small feat, as the adult bobcat weighed around 30 pounds, and placed the animal on the passenger seat. Spirit offered no resistance, instead seeming to relax into the familiar sensation of human care. Tom fastened the seatbelt around the bundled blanket to keep Spirit secure, then climbed back into the driver's seat. One hand on the wheel, the other resting gently on Spirit's side for comfort, Tom drove as quickly as safely possible toward the rehabilitation center. He called ahead on his cell phone, alerting Dr. Sarah Michella, the center's head veterinarian, about the emergency. The 30-minute drive felt like hours. Spirit remained conscious but weak, occasionally making soft vocalizations that tugged at Tom's heart. These weren't the sounds of a wild, dangerous predator. They were the sounds of a sick, tired animal seeking comfort from the one human it trusted. Dr. Michella was waiting when Tom arrived at the center. Together, they carefully transferred Spirit to the medical facility, where a thorough examination revealed the extent of the injuries. In addition to the obvious wounds, Spirit showed signs of severe dehydration and malnutrition, suggesting the animal had been struggling for survival for quite some time. These bite marks are consistent with a mountain lion attack, Dr. Michelle explained as she cleaned and sutured the wounds. Spirit is lucky to be alive. Bobcats are formidable fighters, but they're no match for a cougar. The next few days were touch and go. Spirit was weak from infection and blood loss, and there were moments when Tom feared they might lose the brave animal after all. He spent every possible moment at the center, often sleeping in a chair beside Spirit's recovery cage. During the long hours of watching and waiting, Tom reflected on the extraordinary bond that had formed between them. Wildlife rehabilitation experts often spoke about the importance of maintaining distance from the animals in their care, preventing them from becoming too habituated to humans. Tom had always followed these guidelines carefully. Spirit had been raised with minimal human contact, given every opportunity to retain its wild instincts. Yet here they were, years later, connected by something deeper than training or protocol. A connection forged in those early months when a vulnerable cub had depended on human kindness for survival. On the fourth day, Spirit finally turned a corner. The fever broke, and the bobcat began to eat on its own again. Tom was there when Spirit first stood up, wobbling but determined. Their eyes met, and Tom could swear he saw something like gratitude in that golden gaze. The healing process was gradual but steady. As Spirit's strength returned, so did something else. A sense of belonging at the center that hadn't been there during the original rehabilitation. This time, Spirit didn't pace restlessly at the edges of the enclosure, looking toward the wild. Instead, the bobcat seemed content to remain near the buildings, often positioning itself where it could see Tom working with other animals. Dr. Michelle was puzzled by this behavior. "It's highly unusual," she admitted to Tom during one of their daily check-ins. "Spirit is physically capable of returning to the wild now, but shows no inclination to do so. It's as if the second rescue has fundamentally changed something about the animal's perception of this place." Tom nodded thoughtfully. He had noticed the same thing. Spirit had found a home here. Not just the center itself, but the entire concept of existing between two worlds. No longer fully wild, but not domesticated either, Spirit seemed to have chosen a life that bridged both realms. As weeks turned into months, a new routine emerged. Spirit was given free run of the property during the day, coming and going as it pleased. The other staff members grew accustomed to seeing the large bobcat lounging in the shade of the oak trees or following Tom around as he went about his duties. Spirit had become, in essence, a resident ambassador for the center. The arrangement wasn't without its challenges. Wild animal regulations required careful documentation and special permits. There were concerns about Spirit's effect on other rehabilitation patients and questions about the long-term sustainability of such an arrangement. But the bond between Tom and Spirit had captured the attention of the wildlife community, and supporters rallied to make it possible. Dr. Michelle conducted numerous evaluations to ensure Spirit's physical and psychological well-being. The results were consistently positive. The bobcat showed no signs of stress or captivity neurosis. It maintained healthy behaviors, marked its territory, and even occasionally brought Tom gifts of small prey, a sign of respect and affection among cats. As winter turned to spring, Tom began to understand that Spirit's return had changed both of them. The elderly volunteer found a new sense of purpose in caring for his old friend. Years of working with wild animals had taught him that genuine connections between species were rare and precious. What he shared with Spirit transcended the typical human-wildlife relationship. For Spirit, the choice to remain seemed equally meaningful. The bobcat had experienced the full cycle of human care, from complete dependence through gradual independence to a hard-won freedom that had ultimately been threatened by the harsh realities of the wild. The decision to return to the safety of the rehabilitation center wasn't a failure of the earlier release. It was an intelligent choice made by an animal that understood its options. One evening in early spring, as Tom sat reading in his favorite chair on the center's porch, Spirit approached and settled down beside him. The massive cat's purr rumbled through the quiet air, a sound that never failed to amaze Tom. Wild bobcats rarely purr, but Spirit seemed to reserve this special communication for their quiet moments together. As Tom gently scratched behind Spirit's ears, he marveled at the journey that had brought them both to this moment. A decade ago, he had been a lonely widower, recently retired, searching for meaning in his golden years. Volunteering at the Wildlife Center had given him purpose, but Spirit had given him something more. A connection that defied explanation. A friendship that bridged the gap between human and wild. The story of Tom and Spirit became somewhat legendary in wildlife rehabilitation circles. Visitors to the center would often ask to hear the tale of the bobcat that chose to come home. Tom would tell it gladly, always emphasizing the rarity of such a bond and the importance of respecting the wildness in all creatures, even those who chose a different path. As autumn returned once again to the California foothills, Tom found himself once more driving past that familiar intersection. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Spirit sat in the passenger seat, not as a patient being transported, but as a companion choosing to ride along. They were heading to a local school where Tom had been invited to speak about wildlife conservation and the incredible bond he shared with Spirit. At the intersection, Tom pulled over for a moment. This spot that had witnessed 2 rescues now seemed like a symbol of second chances and the power of compassion. Spirit looked out the window, perhaps remembering its own dramatic encounters at this very place. "Ready, old friend?" Tom asked, his hand resting on Spirit's head. Spirit's response was a gentle nuzzle against Tom's arm, followed by that rumbling purr that never failed to warm the old man's heart. Together, they continued down the road toward whatever adventures awaited them. In the years that followed, Tom and Spirit became ambassadors for a new understanding of human-wildlife relationships. They demonstrated that sometimes, in rare and special circumstances, the boundaries between wild and domestic, human and animal, could blur in ways that enriched both lives. Tom lived to be 93, and Spirit remained his faithful companion until the very end. When Tom passed peacefully in his sleep on a foggy autumn morning, Spirit had been curled up beside his bed, a guardian keeping watch over the man who had saved him twice, once from the road, and once from giving up on the possibility that humans could be trusted. The staff at the rehabilitation center found them together the next morning. Spirit had died sometime during the night, his great heart apparently deciding that his purpose in life had been fulfilled. Dr. Michella, now elderly herself, would later remark that she had never seen such devotion between species. They buried Tom and Spirit side by side, beneath the oak tree where they had spent so many peaceful afternoons together. The headstone bore a simple inscription: Tom Bradley and Spirit, proof that love transcends all boundaries. The intersection where it all began became a small roadside memorial, visited by wildlife lovers from around the world. People would stop there, hoping perhaps to witness their own miracle, to experience proof that in a world often divided by differences, unexpected connections are still possible. And sometimes, on misty autumn mornings when the light filters through the pine trees just right, visitors swear they can see 2 figures in the distance, an elderly man and a magnificent bobcat, walking together along the forest's edge, their bond eternal and unbroken, reminding all who witness it that the most profound relationships often arise from the simplest acts of kindness. The legacy of Tom and Spirit lived on through the countless animals that found refuge at the center, and through the hundreds of volunteers who heard their story and were inspired to dedicate themselves to bridging the gap between human and wild. Their tale became a testament to the possibility that with patience, respect, and sometimes a miraculous leap of faith, the barriers between species could be crossed, creating connections that transform both human and animal lives. In a world where such stories are increasingly rare, the friendship between Tom Bradley and the bobcat known as Spirit served as a beacon of hope, proof that love knows no boundaries, that kindness is never forgotten, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the wild things choose to trust us with their hearts. Their story continues to inspire new generations of wildlife rehabilitators, conservationists, and anyone who believes in the power of compassion to create unexpected miracles. For in the end, the most shocking thing about Spirit's return wasn't that the bobcat remembered the man who saved him. It was that their reunion revealed the depth of connection possible between human and wild hearts, a bond that transcended species and touched the very essence of what it means to care for another living being.